The wind tore through the barren plains, carrying flakes of snow that stung like needles against bare skin. The sky was a low steel gray, and the forests seemed to shiver under its weight. Amid the white wasteland, a lone figure moved with the silence of the land itself, a native man whose presence seemed both rooted in the earth and untouchable by it. His long black braids swung across his back as he adjusted the leather strap holding his satchel. The tan frontier shirt stretched across his broad chest, and his leather trousers, scuffed from years of travel, were tucked tightly into worn boots. Every step was deliberate, measured, but powerful, like a panther moving through snow. He spotted movement ahead. Not the cautious shuffle of wildlife, but a small, fragile shape stumbling through the snow, her bare feet leaving pink tracks in the frozen crust. She was young, no older than 20, with hair the color of winter ash and eyes that held both fear and stubborn defiance. Her hands clutched something close to her chest, a tiny loaf of bread wrapped in a scrap of cloth, her only shield against the unforgiving cold. The man did not hesitate. He moved faster, snow crunching underfoot, and reached her before the next gust could push her into collapse. Kneeling beside her, he spoke in a calm, steady voice that carried warmth despite the storm. "Here, take my cloak." She flinched, fear etched across her face, but the wind offered no choice. His hands were large but gentle, pulling the thick, fur-lined cloak around her shoulders. The warmth was immediate, and for the first time in days her teeth stopped chattering. She looked up at him, confusion and suspicion warring with relief. He said nothing, only lifted her from the snow with the strength of someone used to carrying both the weight of the land and the weight of lives. They moved through the storm together, his pace sure and unwavering. The snow swallowed their tracks almost as soon as they were made, erasing evidence of the girl's fragile journey. She glanced at him, trying to find a name, a sign of identity, but all she saw was someone who had become both guardian and guide. His eyes, dark and steady, scanned the horizon constantly, always alert, always present. After what felt like hours, a low timber-bird cabin emerged from the white expanse, smoke curling lazily from its chimney despite the storm. He carried her inside without a word, brushing the snow from her cloak and setting her gently near the hearth. The warmth enveloped her like a promise she had long forgotten existed. The man moved to the window, peering into the storm, every muscle tense but composed. Then finally, he turned to her, his voice soft but firm. "Rest. Eat when you can. The storm can wait." The girl, still trembling, allowed herself to sink into the chair, her lips parted, eyes wide. For the first time she realized she was no longer alone. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside, a quiet presence promised protection. And though she did not yet know his name, she understood something deeper. He would not let the world's cruelty reach her again. The fire crackled, and for the first time in many nights, the girl dared to close her eyes, trusting, just a little, that she had found someone worth following. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. The girl, still wrapped in the thick cloak, hunched over the small loaf of bread he had set before her. Her hands, red and bruised from the snow, trembled as she tore a piece, the warmth from both the fire and the bread slowly reaching her frozen limbs. He watched quietly from across the room, a strong Native American man with a long black braid, a tan frontier shirt, and leather trousers, kneeling by the hearth to adjust a cast-iron pot of beans and carrots that simmered with a comforting aroma. There was no rush, no questions, only the patience that spoke louder than words. She dared a glance at him. In his steady gaze, she saw no judgment, only concern. For the first time she didn't feel like the world's prisoner. She felt seen. "Eat slowly," he said finally, his voice low and calm, almost blending with the fire's crackle. "Your body needs it more than your pride." She hesitated, then nodded, swallowing quickly to hide the tremor in her throat. Each bite warmed more than her stomach, it warmed her hope. Outside, the blizzard continued its relentless assault, but inside, the cabin seemed to exist in a different world, a sanctuary against the cruelty she had just escaped. After she ate, he handed her a wool blanket, patched with care in shades of muted brown and forest green. "Wrap yourself," he said, though his tone carried no command. She obeyed, folding it around her shoulders like a fragile shield. Sitting across from her, he picked up a knife from the table and began sharpening it, the metal singing softly in the lamplight. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. Yet there was an undeniable gentleness in the precision. A quiet strength that reminded her of the snow-draped mountains outside, unyielding yet protective. I didn't mean to take it, she whispered finally, voice barely audible. The bread. I just wanted to save a boy. Had nothing. Not even snow to lick. His eyes softened, and for a moment the storm outside seemed to hush in respect. I can see that, he replied. And you chose to act, even when it meant danger. That takes courage. The girl's lips quivered, and she looked down at her hands. For weeks, she had expected only punishment, only cold judgment. Yet here was someone who saw her need, her heart, and not just the stolen bread. A silence stretched between them, but it was not empty. It was a space filled with trust, fragile, but growing. She finally dared to ask, Why help me? He paused, eyes flicking toward the window, where snowflakes clung stubbornly to the panes. Because sometimes, he said softly, the right thing isn't about rules. It's about keeping someone alive so they can fight another day. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself relax. The morning sun slanted through frost-lined windows, painting golden streaks across the cabin's floor. The storm had eased, leaving behind a world dusted in white, delicate, and quiet. Eloise stirred under the thick blanket, blinking at the unfamiliar comfort around her. She stretched her arms, wincing slightly from the soreness that had settled into her shoulders and wrists. Native Man was already awake, crouched by the door, untying a horse from the frost-covered post, the long black braid down his back brushing lightly against his tan frontier shirt and leather trousers, details so natural to him they seemed part of the dawn itself. His movements were fluid, practiced, as she watched silently, marveling at the ease with which he seemed to inhabit the world, even in the coldest, harshest corners. There was a sense of quiet command about him, a calm that didn't need to be demanded, it simply existed, filling the space around him. Morning, she said softly, her voice rasping from disuse. He looked over his shoulder, a faint nod acknowledging her presence. Morning. The land doesn't wait for anyone to wake, he replied. His tone wasn't harsh, just matter of fact. We need to check the garden before the frost melts and ruins what's growing. The garden was small but thriving, rows of hardy greens poking through the snow, delicate shoots of early spring braving the icy crust. He handed her a pair of leather gloves, worn but functional, and gestured toward the rows. Here. Hold these steady. You'll learn faster if you do it yourself. Eloise hesitated, then took the gloves, the leather stiff against her fingers. As they worked together, planting, pruning, and clearing frost, she realized the rhythm of his movements mirrored a kind of quiet meditation. There was patience in every gesture, a silent insistence that life, even in its smallest forms, could be nurtured back from the edge of ruin. Hours passed with simple conversation, clipped and practical: how to gauge the soil, how to repair a broken fence, how to move quietly through the woods without startling game. Every lesson carried not just survival skills, but a deeper truth, that care, precision, and presence could shape life even in the harshest of places. When they paused for a break, he pulled a small loaf of fresh bread from his pack and offered it to her. She hesitated, then accepted it gratefully. I thank you, she murmured, for teaching me, for letting me stay. He gave a small shrug, eyes scanning the horizon. You didn't choose this life, but you're here now. You'll need to know how to move through it without fear. That's all. There was a brief silence before she asked, almost shyly, Do you ever regret helping me? He looked down at her, a faint shadow crossing his features. "Regret doesn't help anyone," he said finally. "We can only act on what we know is right, and letting you freeze—" "That wouldn't have been right," she nodded, sensing there was more beneath the surface, memories he carried like hidden scars. Yet there was no bitterness in his voice, only resolve. As dusk fell, the sky blushed pink and lavender, the cold retreating slightly with the promise of spring. Eloise realized that the world outside the cabin was still dangerous, still harsh. But inside, she had begun to find something else. Trust, security, and a sense that she was no longer just surviving, she was beginning to live. And in that quiet understanding, a fragile hope began to take root, one that promised even in the face of unforgiving winters, warmth, care, and courage could endure. The wind had softened, but a chill still lingered in the valley, making the cabin's smoke curl lazily into the sky. Eloise moved quietly, tending the small fire while he checked the perimeter, his figure outlined against the fading light. She no longer flinched at his presence. Instead, she found comfort in it, the steady certainty of someone who had seen life's worst and still chose to protect. "Dinner will be ready soon," he said without looking back, the words casual but warm. He carried a bundle of firewood in each arm, the movement effortless, almost graceful despite the roughness of the frontier life. She watched him, her thoughts swirling. His quiet strength wasn't in the loud heroism of stories, it was in the way he noticed every detail, remembered every small thing, and acted without expecting praise. The way he moved in the snow, the way he repaired tools, even the way he spoke softly when no one else was listening, it all felt like a lifeline she could cling to. After the meal, they sat together on the porch, the stars beginning to prick through the cold night sky. Eloise spoke carefully, testing the silence. "Do you ever think about the town?" He tilted his head, studying the horizon where dark shapes marked the distant tree line. "I think about it," he admitted, "but I don't dwell there. Too many ghosts. Too many mistakes I can't change. We live here now. That's what matters," she nodded slowly. "It's strange to feel safe. I've spent so long fearing people, fearing judgment, even hunger. I never thought I could feel normal." His gaze softened, just slightly, the faintest shadow of a smile brushing his lips. "Normal is a luxury," he said quietly, "but it's not impossible. You deserve that feeling, Eloise. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The tranquility didn't last long. A distant clatter reached their ears' hooves on frozen ground, the echo carrying through the valley like a warning. He rose instantly, moving to the edge of the porch, eyes narrowing. Eloise's heart beat faster, a mix of fear and anticipation. "Who is it?" she whispered. "Someone from the town," he replied, voice calm but tight. "They might want to test the new rules. See if we're soft." His hand rested briefly on the rifle by the door, the familiar weight comforting to both of them. Eloise swallowed, gripping the railing. "Do you think they'll hurt us?" He shook his head. "Not if we're ready. We won't run. We won't beg. We'll face them together." The figures emerged through the twilight, shadows against the snow, cautious but persistent. The sense of impending conflict hung in the air, sharp and electric. Yet as he stood, tall and unflinching, the wind tugged at his long braid, the same braid that marked him quietly as a strong Native American man, though he bore the identity with the kind of silence that didn't. To ask to be noticed, and his stance radiated something beyond strength. It was certainty, a promise that no harm would come to those he chose to protect. Eloise's fear was tempered by admiration, awe, and a fragile trust that had grown between them. She realized that survival wasn't just about skill or courage, it was about choosing to stand beside someone whose heart matched the strength of their arms. And as the first rider stepped closer, she knew, without doubt, that whatever the night would bring, she would not face it alone. The night air bit into their faces, carrying the scent of snow and the faint iron tang of unease. The riders approached slowly, boots crunching on frost-hardened ground, horses stamping as if they could sense the tension in the valley. Eloise stayed close behind him, her fingers brushing the rifle stock with a trembling mix of fear and resolve. "Stay behind me," he said, voice low, steady. Not a command, but a reassurance. She nodded, swallowing hard, the warmth of trust anchoring her amidst the swirling storm of nerves. The lead rider dismounted, his coat flapping in the wind. "Mathis," he called, voice trying to mask defiance with authority. "We heard rumors. The girl, the thief, she's with you. We came to see if it's true. He stepped forward, shoulders square, eyes locked on the rider. Eloise noticed the subtle weight in his stance. Not aggression, not surrender, but a warning that crossed no lines, yet promised consequence if boundaries were tested. She's under my protection, he said simply. No one touches her. You'll do well to remember that. A murmur ran through the group, disbelief and uncertainty rippling beneath their cautious postures. And if we don't like that? One of the men spat. His hand hovered near a gun holstered at his side, but he didn't draw. Something in the calm, unyielding figure before him gave pause. Eloise felt her heart hammering, but a small spark of courage ignited within her. She stepped slightly forward, voice clear, despite the fear trembling in it. I did what I had to do. I only took one loaf to save a child. You judged me without knowing. And now, I'm not running from the truth. The riders froze. None had expected a voice, let alone one so steady, to rise from the girl they had once scorned. She held her head high, seeing him out of the corner of her eye, the unwavering figure who had saved her not just from the rope, but from despair itself. I stand with her, he said. His tone was quiet, but every word carried weight, echoing across the frozen clearing. No one here decides what justice is but the truth, and the truth isn't a story told by fear or rumor. The lead rider glanced around, assessing the group, then back at him. The tension was a taut rope, ready to snap. Then, slowly, one by one, the townsmen shifted uneasily, doubt creeping in where certainty had ruled before. The fire of judgment faltered. Eloise's chest rose and fell with shaky breaths. She had not realized until now how heavy the burden of fear had been, how it had weighed on every step she took. Yet here she was, standing, speaking, with someone who had not only believed in her survival, but in her voice, her truth. Finally, the lead rider spoke again, a mixture of grudging respect and hesitation. We came to see if it was true, he said. Seems you were right. A cold wind cut through the valley, but it no longer carried the sharp edge of threat. It carried possibility. Possibility that the past could be faced, that fear could give way to justice, and that survival could coexist with dignity. He glanced at Eloise, eyes softening just enough for her to catch the flicker of approval. She returned it, a quiet gratitude, a newfound strength that promised this night would not define her, but rather it would mark the beginning of a different life. The riders remounted slowly, reluctant but subdued, their departure a silent acknowledgement of the truth standing in the snow. Eloise exhaled, the first real relief in weeks washing over her. He lowered his rifle, brushing a lock of snow-damp hair from his forehead, his long braid shifting against his shoulder in the cold. A quiet part of him he rarely spoke of, the silent mark of the strong Native American man he was. You did well, he said simply. No exaggeration, no flattery. Just recognition. And in that moment, Eloise understood. Survival had been one thing, but courage, true courage, was something else entirely. And she had it now because he had never let her face the darkness alone. The morning sun crept over the frost-kissed hills, casting pale gold across the snow. The cold air no longer bit as sharply. It carried a quiet promise as if the valley itself had exhaled after the night's tension. Eloise trudged through the fresh drifts, the warmth of the cabin and its hearth still lingering in her memory. Beside her, he moved with careful, steady steps, the rifle slung across his back, posture unyielding yet not threatening. Where are we going? She asked, voice soft, curiosity threading through her tone. To check the homestead fences, he replied. Winter has loosened the posts. If livestock wander, we'll have more trouble than rumors. She nodded, eyes scanning the landscape. Even the familiar woods seemed transformed under the delicate frost. Snow clung to branches like crystal, and the distant creek gurgled beneath ice that shimmered in the morning light. She felt a strange sense of peace, a calm she hadn't known in months. And yet, walking beside him, she also felt a thrill of anticipation and unspoken promise that she would never be alone again. They worked in silence at first. Clay inspected posts, hammering stakes with precision, while Eloise trudged snow from fallen branches and helped reinforce the fence line. Every movement felt deliberate, almost meditative. Each shared glance, each nod of approval, carried the weight of trust built not through words, but through actions. You're stronger than you realize, he said suddenly, pausing mid-swing to glance at her. And braver, Eloise blushed, looking down at her hands, the rough edges of her fingers now pink from exertion rather than cold. I only want to help, she said, voice wavering, but determination steady beneath it. You do more than help, he replied. You remind people what they're capable of if they just stand tall and speak the truth. His eyes flicked to the valley, as if warning her that even in moments of calm, storms lingered nearby. A distant bark reached them. One of the farm dogs had discovered a rabbit, and the sound carried across the frozen ground. Eloise laughed, a soft, unguarded sound, and he turned toward her, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. It was the first smile she had seen on his face in days, not of ease, but of quiet satisfaction, and it touched her in a way words never could. As the sun rose higher, they paused atop a hill, surveying the stretch of land that would sustain them through the coming months. Snow crunched beneath their boots. Eloise felt a thrill of ownership, not of the land itself, but of the sense that she belonged somewhere, that someone had placed her firmly in the world and would stand beside her, no matter what. Thank you, she whispered, almost to herself. He didn't look at her directly. Don't thank me yet, he said, voice low. We've only started. Winter isn't done testing us, and neither are people, but we'll face it together. And if we do, it won't just be survival. It'll be something stronger. Eloise let the words sink in. Together, she repeated. It tasted strange on her tongue, yet comforting, like a seed planted that would grow into something permanent. The wind stirred, lifting snowflakes into a soft spiral around them. The valley was quiet save for the creek, the wind, and the occasional clatter of tools. But in that quiet, Eloise realized she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. Hope that even after fear and betrayal, kindness could endure. Hope that someone could stand unwaveringly beside her. Hope that a new chapter warm, steady, and alive was beginning. And in the corner of her eye, she saw him adjust the brim of his hat, the movement making his long braid shift, a quiet, natural mark of the strong Native American man he was. Though he never spoke of it and never needed to silence strength personified. She smiled to herself. Whatever storms were still to come, she knew they would face them together. The valley was quiet in the late afternoon, a deceptive calm that made the crunch of snow underfoot sound louder than it should. Eloise followed him along the ridge, scarf wrapped tight, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The homestead was secure for now, fences mended, livestock accounted for, and yet a tension lingered that neither snow nor fire could dispel. They're talking, he said, voice low, almost hidden by the wind. Some in town haven't forgotten last winter. Eloise frowned, glancing at the cluster of distant rooftops. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, but the usual hum of daily life felt muted, uneasy. Talking about what? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scanned the horizon, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. His long black braid, carried with the quiet pride of his native heritage, shifted gently in the cold breeze, and he moved with the kind of precision that had become instinctual, alert to every whisper of sound. About us. About the girl they almost hanged. About the mayor's son. His words were measured, a calm warning, not a threat. Eloise's fingers twitched at her sides. I thought after what happened, they'd leave us alone. They think fear controls people, he said quietly. But they forget courage exists even in small hands. Even in young girls who take what's needed to keep someone alive. For a moment she didn't speak, letting his words sink. Then, in the distance, a cloud of dust stirred along the road that led to town. A wagon, moving faster than usual, the driver leaning forward as if racing against something or someone. He noticed it first, tensing slightly, and she saw the subtle shift in his posture, the same posture that had saved her before. Stay close, he said, his hand brushing hers briefly, grounding her in the cold. She nodded, heart pounding, knowing instinctively that whatever this was, he would face it head-on. The wagon slowed at the edge of the woods, and a young man jumped down, gasping, red-faced from the cold. Sir, something's happening at the edge of town. Folks are trying to burn the baker's shop. They blame her again. Eloise's eyes widened. Fear threatened to rise, but he placed a firm hand on her shoulder. Then we'll stop it, he said, steady, unshakable. Together. The ride into town was swift, the wind biting at their cheeks, snow swirling in a chaotic dance. He moved with unerring skill, every step sure, every glance calculating, the very image of strength and calm. Eloise clutched the reins, feeling both adrenaline and reassurance. This man, this steadfast presence, was her shield and her anchor. As they arrived, the scene was chaotic. A small mob had gathered, torches lit, shouting accusations and shaking fists. Eloise recognized some faces, neighbors, frightened and angry, but also unsure. And there, at the center, the bakery stood, smoke curling from a broken window, bread scattered across the snow. He dismounted quietly, her hands tightening on the reins, and she saw him move through the crowd like a force of nature, silent, commanding, unyielding. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. Yet the mob parted before him, faces pale, voices lowering as if recognizing something older, stronger, undeniable. Enough! His voice rang clear across the square. You risk judgment without proof. You risk harm without reason. And for what? Bread? Eloise felt a swell of pride and relief. He had not changed. He remained the unyielding, protective presence she had come to rely on. And this, she realized, was the true strength of who he was. Not in anger, not in fear, but in unwavering conviction and the courage to stand for right, no matter the cost. The mob hesitated. Silence fell heavy and absolute, only broken by the distant creak of the snow-laden trees. And in that pause, Eloise understood something profound. The valley could be harsh, the people quick to judge, but with him beside her, she was no longer alone. The square was still, a frozen tableau as snow drifted lazily from the gray sky. The mob's anger had not fully vanished, but the fear in their eyes was undeniable, a silent acknowledgement of the man who stood before them. He did not raise his fists, did not shout, yet every word carried weight, every movement commanded respect. Eloise stayed close, feeling the warmth of his presence even in the biting cold. You think bread is small? He asked, his voice low, carrying across the silent faces. You think stealing a loaf is worse than starving a child? You are wrong, a murmur ran through the crowd. A few mothers clutched their children tighter, a few elders shook their heads, ashamed. The mob's fire had cooled, replaced by the slow dawning of understanding. He scanned the faces, not with cruelty, not with anger, but with the kind of clarity that could see through fear and denial. The quiet strength of his native roots echoed in the steadiness of his stance, though he never spoke of it, never used it as shield or banner. Eloise felt a swell of courage. She stepped forward, voice trembling but strong. I didn't take the bread for myself, she said. I took it for a boy who had no one. I begged for help. They said no, and when I acted I was blamed. But the truth is here. She held up Mary Grace's note, letting it catch the dim light. The crowd shifted, eyes narrowing on the paper, and then widening as recognition sank in. Mary Grace herself stepped forward from the edge of the square, small and trembling, but resolute. I saw it, she said, her voice carrying over the snow. I saw Bennett Dalton take the keys and the bread. I was afraid. I stayed silent. But I cannot stay silent anymore. She handed over a ledger, the bakery's accounts, each page marked with evidence of what had truly happened. The crowd gasped, faces paled. Murmurs became whispers. Whispers became shame. Even the mayor, pale and stiff, could not find words. He had been forced to confront the truth, and it burned. Eloise's gaze met the man beside her. He did not speak. He never needed to. His presence alone told the story. Justice would be upheld, but not in violence or vengeance. He believed in protection, in standing for what was right, and he had taught her to do the same. Bennett Dalton, humiliated and bound by the same rope that had once threatened Eloise, was escorted from the square. The mayor, silent and defeated, resigned. The town had learned a hard lesson: fear and judgment, without proof, could destroy lives, but courage and truth could restore them. After the crowd dispersed, Eloise and he walked through the quiet streets, snow crunching underfoot. No one called out, no one followed. The world had shifted slightly, made better by their steadfast resolve. She looked up at him, cheeks flushed from the cold and adrenaline. We did it, she whispered, awe in her voice. He shook his head gently, braids swaying. No, he said, you did it. I just made sure the rope never tightened again. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and warm despite the frost. In that quiet, she realized she was no longer the same girl who had stood trembling in the abandoned church. She had strength now, tempered by fear, guided by trust and illuminated by his unwavering presence. Back at the homestead, the fire glowed, shadows dancing against wooden walls. The air smelled of pine, smoke, and the faint tang of bread baking. They were home. Together, and for the first time in many months, Eloise felt something she hadn't in a long while: hope. Outside, the snow had stopped. Inside, warmth, trust, and quiet love settled over them, a promise that the worst winter had passed, and spring, real, full, and unbroken, was beginning. The world had finally quieted. For the first time in months, neither fear nor whispers followed them. The town had seen the truth, some reluctantly, some with shame, and now the valley breathed easier, as if the land itself forgave them. Eloise stood at the doorway of the cabin, watching gentle flakes melt into the awakening spring ground. Her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, warm and familiar, a gift he had repaired with quiet hands the night before. Behind her, the cabin buzzed with soft sounds, the chop of firewood, the faint clatter of tools, and his measured footsteps outside. She stepped onto the porch, and there he was, steady as ever, checking the fence lines, braid brushing against his back as he worked, movements precise in a way that seemed shaped by the old ways of his people. She watched him for a long moment, admiring the calm certainty he carried, a peace she had never known before coming here. "Need help?" she called softly. He turned, eyes warm in the morning light, and nodded once. "If you want. Not because you must." That was something she cherished about him. He never demanded, never pushed, only invited. Eloise walked toward him, boots crunching over the soft ground. As she reached him, he handed her a small bundle of nails and pointed toward the loose plank. "Press it here," he said gently. "I'll hold it." She placed the nail carefully, fingers brushing the rough wood. His hand steadied the board from the other side, and for a heartbeat, their fingers touched. Warmth spread through her chest, not the frantic gratitude she once felt, but something slow, deep, and blooming. As they repaired the fence, she found herself smiling. "You know, I never believed I'd have a place to belong." He paused, hammer midair, then spoke quietly. "You never needed permission to belong." "Not here." The words wrapped around her like a blanket. By midday, the sky brightened, and they walked toward the creek carrying buckets for water. The snow had melted near the banks, revealing smooth stones and patches of green grass. Eloise knelt to fill a bucket, watching the water swirl, cold and clear. He stood nearby, scanning the horizon, as always protective, aware, the ease of his movements reflecting skills passed down through generations. "Is something still bothering you?" she asked. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Not fear," he said softly. "Memory." She knew what he meant: his wife Lena, the love he lost, the pain that shaped him. Eloise swallowed, heart tight. "If you ever want to speak of her, I'll listen." He looked at her, then truly looked, and something softened in his gaze. "You remind me that life can grow again," he said. "Even after winter takes everything." Her breath hitched. It wasn't a confession, not exactly. It was something deeper, a recognition, a bridge between two wounded hearts. Later that evening, they ate together in the warm glow of the fire. Bread baked slowly in the oven, filling the cabin with soft, sweet warmth. Eloise watched him as he cleaned his tools, the golden light catching on his braid, outlining the strength of his shoulders, and hinting at the quiet heritage that shaped him. She spoke quietly. "Do you think the townsfolk will ever trust us fully?" He placed the tools aside and sat across from her. "Trust takes time," he said, "but we are no longer alone." "That makes time easier." Eloise nodded, chest warming. She wasn't the girl from the gallows anymore. She was a woman building a life, learning strength, and sharing it with the man who had saved her life and unknowingly healed her spirit. As the night deepened, wind brushing softly against the windows, he draped a blanket over her shoulders before she could protest. "You should rest," he murmured. "And you?" she asked. He tapped the glowing embers with a poker, sending sparks upward like tiny fireflies. "I'll keep watch a little longer." Old habits. But she knew the truth: he wasn't guarding against danger anymore. He was guarding their peace. And as she drifted to sleep by the fire, Eloise realized something with absolute clarity. A home wasn't just a place. It was a person. And he was hers. The first true warmth of spring crept slowly over the valley. Snow no longer dominated the landscape but lingered in soft patches along the fence lines and in the shadowed hollows. The air smelled of damp earth, green shoots and wood smoke curling from the cabin chimney. Inside, the cabin buzzed quietly. Eloise hummed softly, folding freshly laundered clothes and setting them on the shelves while he worked near the stove, stirring a pot of stew. Sunlight filtered through the window, catching the long braid that fell across his shoulder and highlighting the quiet discipline etched into his tan, strong features. Every motion, the way he sharpened the knife beside him, the careful way he measured ingredients, carried a memory of traditions passed down long before him, skills learned in childhood and perfected over years. The home they had built together was small but alive, warmth in every corner, proof of survival and choice. Eloise paused, looking at him. "Do you ever think about leaving this place behind?" she asked, voice barely above the soft bubbling of the stew. He shook his head, eyes fixed on the simmering pot. "No, this is where we start again, where we make it right. Where no one goes hungry and no one is left behind." The faint curve of a scar on his forearm, a story unspoken, reminded her of generations who had endured far harsher winters, far deeper losses. She smiled faintly. The memory of the gallows, the snowstorm, the rope around her neck, all of it seemed distant now. Not gone, but softened by the choices they had made, the lives they had saved, and the trust they had built. After lunch, they went outside to the garden. Green shoots of vegetables pushed through the thawing earth, and chickens wandered under the fence. Eloise knelt, pulling weeds and turning soil, while he repaired a section of the chicken pen, hands steady, braid swinging behind him as he moved. Every movement was deliberate, almost ritualistic, echoing patterns he had learned long ago in the forests and hills beyond the valley. They worked side by side, speaking little, their presence a comfort deeper than words. A rustling in the yard caught their attention. A small boy appeared, hair windswept, holding a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. He hesitated, then held it toward Eloise. "For you," he said softly. "For sharing." Eloise knelt and accepted it, warmth filling her chest. "Thank you." "That's very kind," she said. She looked at him then, and in the calm certainty of his gaze, she sensed the quiet patience of someone raised to see the land as teacher and guide. The afternoon passed in quiet contentment. Clay or Clay, as she sometimes whispered when no one else was around, showed her how to split logs safely, how to check the fence posts, and how to tend to the garden. Every movement carried the weight of his past and the promise of their future, shaped by a lineage that had survived, adapted, and thrived. As evening fell, they sat together on the porch, wrapped in a single wool blanket, the sky painted with the deep blues and soft pinks of sunset. He handed her a cup of tea, and for the first time in her life, Eloise felt utterly safe. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You said I would never go hungry or be alone." He reached over and lightly brushed her hair behind her ear, braid falling into place. "I said that, yes. But you helped me keep mine, too." Eloise leaned her head against his shoulder. The wind had lost its bite, the snow had retreated, and the valley was alive again. The rope that once bound her hands was gone, replaced by warmth, trust, and the strength of a man whose hands had learned to protect, nurture, and endure not for vengeance, but for hope. And as the stars began to pierce the twilight sky, they sat together, side by side, two souls who had survived winter together and were now ready for all the springs to come. The valley breathed. The cabin glowed. And their hearts, once scarred by loss, were finally home.